From Wolli Bluff, here at the eastern end of the Wolli Creek Valley, you look down on Wolli Creek Railway Station, where the airport rail line tunnel begins. Today, the airport line is a critical part of Sydney's heavy rail network, but it would never have been built without a community fight against the F5 freeway going through the valley. It's a striking example of how the determined intervention of an activist community group can change the course of a city's development for the better. In 1988, Nick Greiner had come to power promising to lift the freeway reservation through the Wolli Valley. And indeed, in late 88, his government announced the road reservation had in fact been removed. But it was all a cynical hoax, and the next year they released an environmental impact statement for a surface freeway straight down the valley. The EIS was a disaster. A record number of submissions made it obvious that it was publicly unpopular, and it came out that much of the technical data used to justify the project had been fraudulently altered. The RTA pulled back, and by the end of 1990, Greiner's push for the road was in deep crisis. In October 1990, the independent MP for North Sydney, Robin Reid, asked in Parliament a series of questions about the F5 road proposal, and in his answers, Roads Minister Wal Murray denied the existence of a secret 1987 review of the 1981 Kirby inquiry into the proposal that the Department of Main Roads had commissioned. It happened that the Wolli Creek Preservation Society was in possession of the secret review. Wal Murray had misled Parliament, and the crisis deepened further. This is the copy of the secret review that was leaked to the Preservation Society. No doubt the DMR chiefs had hoped that their hand-picked consultant would deliver a devastating critique of Commissioner Kirby's methodology and conclusions. They must have been bitterly disappointed. The review grudgingly acknowledged the authoritative nature of the Kirby inquiry, that it remained completely relevant, and that it constituted a user-friendly handbook on road planning and how to criticise it. And it clearly warned the department of the danger arising from the fact that senior officers of the DMR had made, at the inquiry, damaging admissions about the impacts and counterproductive nature of radial freeways. By early 1991, the Roads and Traffic Authority had all but sidelined the Community Advisory Committee it had set up after the failure of the 89 EIS, and its replacement, the Interdepartmental Study Team, had also gone missing in action. Now there was to be a new consultation process to revive the F5, and it was called the Botany West Transport Study. The Wolli Creek Preservation Society decided to boycott this one as well. It was the Botany West Transport Study that was to bring the RTA undone. The Kirby inquiry 10 years earlier had been concerned almost entirely with the concept of radial freeways and the F5 in particular. The respective roles of road and rail in getting containers out of the new Port Botany were a big issue for Kirby, but his terms of reference didn't extend to looking at direct public transport alternatives to the freeway. Now, one emerged, and it was a game changer. In late 1991, Railcorp bureaucrats made a very cautious approach to the Wolli Creek Preservation Society. It was cloak and dagger stuff. A dinner party at a private home was organised as the cover. They had a concept for a new rail line from the city to the East Hills line via the airport. They could make no headway in Cabinet with this idea, but if a community group could run publicly with something very like it, and forced the plan into the RTA's Botany West Transport study, the proposal would be in with a chance. To maintain plausible deniability, the Society's representatives weren't shown documents, maps or plans. The proposed route and characteristics of the line were described and carefully noted down.
But after that, definitely it'll head towards the city.
I was interstate while all this was happening. I first heard about it in Perth, and I was asked to whip up artwork for a brochure. It was rushed to Sydney by courier jet and 50,000 copies were printed. This was the first public outing for the airport line. Miraculously, everything fell into place. Professor Peter Newman, a respected rail advocate who'd engineered Perth's commuter rail revival, happened to be in Sydney, and he launched the Railways Not Freeways campaign on a rock outcrop overlooking the valley. As expected, the campaign forced the airport line, we called it Southern Suburbs Railway, onto the Botany West Transport Study agenda, but only because the RTA thought they could easily see off this new challenge. Their response was to run the final public consultation as a vote between road and rail solutions, but the method was scandalously dishonest. They printed tens of thousands of voting forms, and you could photocopy more if you liked, where all you had to do was tick a box for either Proposal R, the road, or Proposal P, public transport. Identifying yourself was optional. So if they saw the result running against them, the RTA engineers could have padded the result with as many forms as they liked. We outflanked the RTA by creating an honest alternative. You signed a form letter giving name and address, which supported the airport line and the railing of containers and opposed the F5. It was addressed to the Premier, not the RTA, via the Preservation Society, so these votes couldn't simply be thrown away without us knowing how many there were. In late June 1992, the Preservation Society delivered a whopping 8,600 submissions in support of the public transport option to the RTA. In spite of a vigorous campaign by the pro-freeway ERTAG group and the NRMA, 62% of respondents favoured the airport line over the F5. All this took place against the background of a more general crisis engulfing the Greiner government. As a result of its assault on health, education and services, the government had lost its majority in late 1991 and only ruled courtesy of a precarious arrangement with independent MPs. An ICAC investigation into the Metherell affair forced Nick Greiner's resignation a few days after the RTA's F5 submission period closed, and the Fay coalition government that succeeded was in no position to push through an unpopular road. There are many turning points in this struggle, moments when things could have gone either way. But in hindsight, the Society's promotion of the airport line was the critical one. In the months that followed, with the Wolli Valley F5 freeway proposal in disarray and Sydney seeking to host the 2000 Olympics, the airport line became a serious item on the government's agenda, and thereafter it moved steadily towards implementation. In 1993, with the airport line proposal firmly established as an alternative to the F5, the Wolli Creek Preservation Society launched the Too Precious to Pave campaign for the declaration of a Wolli Valley Park. In May, an open letter to the Premier was endorsed by 22 community and conservation groups and over 100 individuals, including many prominent citizens.
From an orbiting satellite, Sydney's inner southwestern suburbs are a dense, unrelieved mass of houses and industry. But one narrow green oasis stands out, the Wolli Creek Valley. A bill being put before the New South Wales Parliament seeks to have this precious green space protected forever as a park for the people of Sydney.
The Wolli Park Trust Bill, tabled in October, was sponsored by Independent MP Clover Moore. It sought to consolidate the valley's open space under a management regime similar to Centennial Park. Meanwhile, the RTA was still trying to decide on an acceptable route for the Wolli section of what they were now calling the M5 East, and their history of duplicity ensured that the list of organisations boycotting their consultation processes continued to grow. In desperation, for the first time, they put forward a serious tunnel option. The airport line proposal sailed through the EIS process. Unlike the motorway, it was universally popular, and in environmental terms it had no ugly downsides. No residents were impacted, there were no off-ramps, and no exhaust stacks spewing traffic fumes across the landscape. Lacking planning approval for the M5 East, Liberal Transport Minister Bruce Baird signed off on the rail project just days before the March 1995 elections, and sadly for him, the media hardly noticed. The Fay government narrowly lost the election to Labor, led by Bob Carr, and the airport line was finished in time for the 2000 Olympics. The Wolli Park Trust Bill lapsed when Parliament was prorogued in December 1994, but the issue had been dramatised and the way cleared for Wolli's open space to become a regional park. When approval for the M5 East was finally given, it was for a tunnel that avoided the valley east of Bexley Road. The M5 East didn't open until 2001, and it was only 4 lanes, not 8, as the DMR had envisaged in its 1970s plans for the Los Angelisation of Sydney. That delay and downsizing stopped Sydney sprawling all the way to the Southern Highlands.
So here we are in 2015, and while the rest of the world has long since abandoned urban motorways, here in Sydney we're fighting against the Baird government's WestConnex, a gigantic, enormously expensive underground motorway system, which would be, if it were ever built, the longest underground motorway system anywhere in the world.
The vital issues for Sydney raised by the Wolli struggle remain unresolved. In Part 5, I'll be reflecting on the lessons for the future.